I want to announce our guest speaker today. Her name is Laura Smith, and she is the Executive Director for the Snoqualmie Valley Community Network. She will be talking about ACEs today, also known as Adverse Childhood Experiences. So please welcome her.
Thank you all for coming out today. I'm very excited to be able to share this information with you. It's information that at my organization we've been learning about for about the last 5 years as it's been evolving and starting to become gain its recognition across the state, throughout the nation, and around the world. So I wanted to start out today by saying, as we learn about adverse childhood experiences, you're going to find it's not really something you're learning about. It's something that you've probably experienced, or you know someone who has experienced. So sometimes during adverse childhood experience talks, your emotions, you might feel some emotions. It could strike you as something that you might want to come back and revisit later. So make sure that if something strikes you during the conversation today about your personal experiences or your children's or your parents, that you give yourself some time at some point during the day to really take a step back and think about that, okay? As we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we're also not trying to lay any blame on anyone. You know, if you're a parent and you're trying to do your best with your children, your parents tried to do their best with you. This is just research that we're learning now that will help inform future generations. Okay, kind of wanted to just set the stage with that. Adverse childhood experiences is, my goal today is to share the information with you and to inspire and hopefully ignite some passion within you to learn more. Most talks about adverse childhood experiences are in the form of a couple of days seminars. And so I'm going to try to really wet your whistle a little bit, and maybe you'll decide you want to learn more about this interesting topic. And as you move into, I'm looking at all the students, as you move into your fields, and all of us who are in fields already, looking at how maybe you can use adverse childhood experiences and trauma-informed approaches in your day-to-day interactions with people, whether they're children, people in middle life, or seniors. Just kind of a new way to look at things. This is an interesting opportunity for us because we have a chance to bring a whole bunch of different systems together in kind of one concept. So within this, we'll be talking about system science, so how we collectively create our current reality. Brain science, we'll be looking at basically 20 plus years of brain science, briefly, to kind of talk about the effects that trauma has on the brain. They've learned a great deal about this. Then that kind of coincides with adverse childhood experiences. And then the happy part, positive adaptation, how we can take what we're learning and inform what we do in a more intentional manner. And some of it we're already doing quite a bit of. What is known about trauma in the brain? There's researchers, and I've detailed these later in your booklet if you want to know some more about this, but there's one particular researcher named Marty Teicher has spent 20 plus years studying trauma in the brain, specifically breaking down maltreatment into different categories and doing scans of people's brains who all suffered from child abuse, and then comparing that to people who were similar to them but did not suffer the maltreatment. So what they're noticing about the brain is that if you suffer child or abuse, maltreatment during your early years, it actually physically changes your brain, okay? Either in the form of increased hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, and it doesn't allow your brain to build the structures that it normally would be building, depending on when you were faced with that particular maltreatment. So the brain develops over time. The effects of maltreatment correspond to the brain region and that is developing at the time of the maltreatment. And I'll get more specific about that in just a moment. The type of abuse also targets different parts of your brain, and depending on where you are as you're growing. And then gender plays a role in the impact of the trauma on the brain. For example, in the research, they've noticed that although both boys and girls are affected by maltreatment, the effects of sexual abuse are more profound in girls, and the effects of neglect are more profound in boys. So the parts of the brain that tend to be most impacted by trauma are the hippocampus, the corpus callosum, the adolescence cortex, and I think I have a pointer. Not exactly. So the hippocampus is the center for controlling emotional reactions, your verbal memory, and spatial memory. And if a child experiences a form of maltreatment, and we'll go into specifically adverse childhood experiences, what those are, but this would be abuse, neglect, absence of a parent, things like this during some of those first ages of life, or sexual abuse during ages 3 to 5, it really impacts this section of the brain. And what you might see the brain doing then is adapting in a way that the brain's normal braking mechanisms fail. So their ability to calm themselves down. They have a very difficult time regulating behavior. Okay, so it's not necessarily that they have a problem, it's that their brain is actually adapting really well to a really poor situation. It's kind of a different way for us to think about what the brain is doing. Okay? Difficulty with verbal spatial memory. In the middle childhood, this age, or in the corpus callosum age range, what you'll see is happening in the corpus callosum normally is you're integrating your hemispheres and you have a facilitation between language development, proficiency in math, social cues. What we see is if neglect happens in infancy or sexual abuse around ages 8, 9, and 10, at this particular time it has a really significant impact on this section of the brain, resulting in language delay, diminished math capacity, diminished integration and coordination, difficulty with social cues, etc. Similar thing with the adolescent cortex. The point really is that trauma impacts the brain in a way that actually physically changes it. So as you're thinking about that, and we start to move into some of the effects of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, we'll be able to connect it a little bit more. Some of the effects of trauma, cognition, learning and thinking. You'll see slowed language development, attention problems, speech delay, poor verbal memory or recall, loss of brain matter or IQ. In mental health, poor social and emotional development, alcohol, tobacco, and other drug use, vulnerabilities, and early initiation of risk behaviors. And adolescent and adult mental health disorders, you see depression, suicide, dissociative disorders, borderline personality, some social effects of trauma, aggression, violent outbursts, poor control of self-control of emotion, and it's hard to modify the behaviors in response to social cues because that part of the brain has been influenced by the trauma and doesn't work that way. So having to teach skills to cope with that. Social isolation, kids who can't navigate friendship very well. So you're probably thinking, oh, I know some kids like that. Oh, I was a kid like that. Risk of victimization. And so basically this slide captures it really nicely. We all start with a neutral brain on the left, and it can go two ways. Sometimes it goes both ways a little bit, but if the brain is subject to traumatic stress, then within our brain we have hormones, chemicals, and cellular systems that are starting to prepare for a tough life, a dangerous world, a fight or flight kind of life, okay? I'm edgy, I'm hot-tempered, I'm quick to react, I'm vigilant, and I'm an individual who pretty much typically expects the worst. And I'm geared up, I'm ready to go. In that worst situation, I'm ready. Imagine that child in a kindergarten classroom. Now, and kind of think about that a little bit, like how do we, if there are any educators, I'm not sure, we're all educators in some form, but so when we're interacting with children, ACEs are so great that most likely 1 in probably 6 children you're encountering is going to have some sort of experience like this. How do we modify what we do and how we behave with them? Going to the other direction, the brain gets a very comforting, benevolent start. Everything's going well. We are kind of laid back in our situation. We think things through. We have time to process. We don't experience as much fight or flight. We don't live in a state of trauma. And our outcome is these types of individuals kind of live more peacefully, but probably don't deal as well with emergency or stressful situations. So we kind of want a little bit of both of that inside of us. So as our brains work through our experiences, it really helps gear us up for what we're dealing with. So the adverse childhood experiences study was there were two tracks kind of going along. You had the neurobiologists doing brain research, looking at the effects of trauma on the brain. And then you have these other groups, a group of people. It was Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control back in the 90s, looking at, there's got to be more to, treating symptoms when they're coming into the office. What is it? What are the underlying causes, or what are the pathways to disease? And so they started they wanted to look at kind of a whole life perspective approach. And what they were noticing, or this is their model that they were speculating, is that we could take a look at conception to death, and that there were certain conditions that happened to someone early on that then impaired them either socially, emotionally, or cognitively. And then because of these things and how it changed them, they didn't at this point know about the trauma. This group was kind of separate from the brain group. Then people would adopt risky behaviors, which then causes additional disease, disability, and social problems, and eventually causes early death. So they initiated, it's basically a survey that they used with over 17,000 patients in California. It was San Diego County, mostly middle class, mostly Caucasian, and all upon regular annual health exams. So it wasn't people who were coming, I'm already coming to you because I'm traumatized. These were regular, like your yearly physical visits where they would do the surveys. They have been able to use their indexes to track this group of 17,000 people over the last 20 plus years. They're still tracking them. So eventually, someone was talking earlier about, ACEs and seniors. Like, what will the eventual impacts, or how will we use this information to inform what we do with seniors? Well, it's interesting because eventually we're going to get to the point with that cohort of people, because it's the largest study in the world of a group of people related to health practices. We'll be able to look at their full trajectory of their lives, their social, emotional, and developmental pieces all the way along. These are the adverse childhood experiences that were included in the adverse childhood experiences study. Abuse and neglect underneath that category. You'll see physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect. They have since kind of broken neglect down into physical neglect and emotional neglect as well. So sometimes you'll see this list, it will have 10. And it always throws me off. I'm like, oh, what's the new? Okay. Indicators of family dysfunction, someone who's mentally ill, depressed, suicidal in the home, a drug addicted or alcoholic family member, witnessing domestic violence against the mother, parental discord, divorce, separation, abandonment, or incarceration of a family member. The World Health Organization has actually taken this on and is starting to translate it into other languages to use throughout the world, and they're adding in other things, because these are a lot of developed country problems. There's other things that, I just spaced the word for being forced into the military, which you see in a lot of countries, developing countries around the world. Other adverse childhood experiences that maybe aren't as common here, that are more common around the world, so that we can start to take a look at adverse childhood experiences more globally, which is really an exciting thing. They just initiated this in 2008. So basically, what happens when you take the ACEs survey, or a doctor is talking to you, interviewing you, is a person comes up with an ACEs score, and it's like essentially it's like 1 point for each category. So if my parents divorced, so I have 1. And if I had any of these other things happening during my crucial growing up years, then I would add them up separately. So it comes up with a total number. So let's say number 7, witnessing domestic violence. If I saw domestic violence over and over and over and over and over again, it would still just count as 1 ACEs point, so to speak, okay? So then what they're looking at, as people were reporting, these 17,000 people were reporting their experiences, they were looking at comparing the number of ACEs that someone reports to health behaviors or health effects that they also are reporting. And this is the exciting part. So, and I'm going to walk you through a number of these. These are from the ACEs study, and in a moment I'll go through some specifically from Washington State. So, adult alcoholism. People reporting for ACEs, the percent of the population reporting adult alcoholism goes up significantly. So this, just to make sure this is 0 ACE, 1 ACE, 2 ACE, 3 ACE, 4 ACE. And then on the left-hand side, the behavior that's being measured, the troubled behavior, the alcoholism. Over here, we're looking at people who have ever experienced teen pregnancy. So the higher your ACE, the more likely it is that you have experienced teen pregnancy, okay? Any questions about this slide before I start moving through? And as I say that, I remember that I was supposed to say, if you have questions as we go, it's okay with me if you go ahead and ask them, because it's kind of confusing material. It's a little bit complicated. And they looked at tons of stuff. So I haven't not been able to include everything that they include in their ACEs study as far as these slides, but I did pull out some of the things that really stand out, or things that I hear our communities talking about. ACEs scores and reporting IV drug use. So, and very few, and you guys will notice, there's not a whole lot of us who don't have an ACE of some sort. Most of us have at least a couple. So based on what they found out of the 17,000 people, they were able to make some probability estimates of those outcomes. So out of 100 people, generally in America, 33 people would report no ACEs. Okay? 1 in 16 would report smoking. 1 in 69, alcoholic, and you can kind of follow through. 51 people would report 1 to 3 ACEs. Okay? And so then it kind of breaks down. 1 in 9 people probably smoke. 1 in 9 alcoholics. 1 in 43 uses IV drugs. And then they take it on to like heart disease. How many people have attempted suicide? And then the 4 to 8 ACEs, you see that things ramp up. So if you just follow like the IV drug use along, 1 in 480, 1 in 43, 1 in 30. So as your ACEs go up, so does the likelihood that you have another one of these significant health behaviors going on. ACEs, they're starting to look at ACEs as the most powerful determinant of public health. And they've been teasing it apart for about 20 years, picking at the study, trying to tear it, how they do with research, try to tear it apart and see if it'll hold up. And it is holding up. Lifelong physical and mental health behavior outcomes, you've seen these in the other slides, but the higher the ACE, the greater the incident of it co-occurring with these other behaviors. It's interesting too, they're now starting to be able to look at other things, as I mentioned earlier, like rates of homelessness, rates of poverty. That slide earlier about teenage pregnancy, they're also able now to look at males' involvement as well. So there's also a data that would support that boys who have an increase in ACEs are more likely to father a baby outside of wedlock, or how you want to put it. So when we're looking at this, the ACEs are causing natural responses to extraordinary circumstances. Our sense of self and ability to influence the world. There's a general feeling of not being worthy of love, not trusting love. This kind of goes back to the trauma and the brain piece. Feeling incapable of having a positive impact on the world. So it gets kind of more and more challenging as you move along with greater amounts of ACEs. Diminished sense of self-worth. Self-regulation. Again, people are hypervigilant. The more ACEs you have, the more your brain's been traumatized. Survival and automatic behaviors, aggression, withdrawal, poor impulse control. And then obviously it's going to impair your learning, your emotional learning and your regular classroom learning. This moves it directly to the state of Washington. Washington is one of 5 states who have started using, it's called the Behavior Risk Surveillance System, short for BRFIS, which is, I don't know, maybe a little more time with an acronym could have been used. But so the BRFIS is a study that we use to study adult health behaviors throughout the state. Are you familiar with the BRFIS? Anyone? Okay, so there's BRFIS, which is for adults, and then there's the Healthy Youth Survey, which is used to measure youth not risk behaviors, but youth health behaviors throughout the state. So in our state, we give the Healthy Youth Survey in grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. And it measures things from nutrition to, do you wear a helmet, to have you been abused, have you thought of suicide, what's your 30-day use of tobacco, marijuana, other drugs, et cetera. So, and it's an anonymous survey, as is the BRFIS. So we get a lot of information that we can then use to guide our prevention efforts. And now that we're starting to learn more about ACEs, we've been weaving ACEs questions into the BRFIS and into the Healthy Youth Survey. So this is from the BRFIS. So in Washington State, ACEs are common. One or more ACEs, 62% of us have at least one or more, and 38% have none, okay, which I think is, I don't know, that seems a little high. ACEs co-occur or cluster. So 26% of adults report 3 or more ACEs. So usually if you have one, you're going to have more than one. 5% of adults have 6 or more of them. And this doesn't mean if you have 8 ACEs, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you had a rough life and your brain has worked really hard to adapt. That's what it means. It doesn't mean we should feel terrible. It may mean that suddenly you go, oh, that's why I've had such a hard time. Or, that's why the struggle has been a long road. Okay, now I know. I can work on this. Among adults exposed to physical abuse, 84% report at least 2 more ACEs, and among adults exposed to sexual abuse, 72%. So these are called out because they're particularly high when you're looking at the physical abuse or the sexual abuse happening, that they're going to be related to other ACEs happening. So there's actually some initiative around the state through the Gates Foundation and Empire Health to study some communities who will specifically take on trying to address one of these with youth to try to really get a handle on how can we, in a meaningful way, start to nail down these ACEs, this traumatic behavior, when kids are in the cycle instead of 20 years from now when they're manifesting depression and suicidal tendencies and whatnot. How can we break in? But at the same time, knowing that we can't just address the kids, we have to address the parents, because most of this is cyclical in nature. Not necessarily that you learn it, some that you learn, but it's passed down through generations. So if we're going to intervene, we have to intervene in multiple ways. Taking a closer look at our state, the percentage of adults, again, this is from the adult survey, but you see the same kind of behavior most of the time. Occasionally you see like a dip like right here, but typically you see it consistently going up, and in a scary way. The percent of the population reporting 0 ACEs who smoke, 10%, which is almost tripling for people with 6, 7, or 8 ACEs. These people are coping, okay? Even in light of knowing that tobacco is addictive and it can kill you. That's all great for my brain, and I know that, but I also know that it's helping me cope in some way with some other trauma I've got going on in my body. So that's why it's hard. That's why sometimes interventions more than cognitive interventions are necessary. So diabetes, for example, is another one that pops up. Cardiovascular disease, this one kind of goes a little bit more up and down, but you definitely see things moving along. Risk for HIV. We measured more than 14 days out of 30 unhealthy mental health days at work. So a lot of times these are people who miss work because they're not feeling well enough mentally to go to work. Treatment for mental health conditions, all really tightly correspond with the adverse childhood experiences. I tossed in obesity, diabetes, and anxiety. So looking at quality of life. And this is where we start to see a little hope for what we can start to do. We're also starting to add in more questions looking some satisfied do you feel with your life? How hopeful do you feel? Do you feel that you get the social emotional support you need? If you're having a difficult time, do you know where you can go? So as you can see, people who are reporting high ACEs don't feel like they're getting a lot of support. Not feeling very satisfied. More divorce. Okay. Then now I'm going to take it down to elementary school level. They're just starting to study this. And this is a researcher in the state of Washington over in Spokane named Dr. Blodgett who studies this. And if you want to look him up, this is directly from his stuff, so his name is down here, so you can look and find out more about his studies. He used 9 elementary schools, and they were looking at kids. 5 of them were from Title I reading programs. 4 of the groups were from just more standard classrooms. But what they were able to look at is looking at what the kids are saying and what's happening in the schools. Adverse events are the greatest single predictor for health, attendance, and behavior. Adverse events are the second strongest predictor for academic failure after special education status. And the relationship between academic achievement and health status appears much less related to income than to adverse childhood experiences. Okay? So some conceptions, maybe some thoughts we've had for a while are being kind of debunked a little bit. It's actually the experiences that you have that are playing a much greater role. I find this one fascinating because I was a high school teacher. So this is taken from the Healthy Youth Survey. So, and the last Healthy Youth Survey, they just took one in 2012, so this would be 2010 data. So if you're a teacher looking out at a classroom of 10th graders, sophomores and seniors, this is what you would be looking at. You're not really wondering who has an ACE, you're wondering, who's experienced which one. Because 0 of them have probably not experienced anything. 5 of them have experienced 1. 6 of them have experienced 2. 3 of them have experienced 3. 4 of them have experienced 4. And then you have the 5s and the 6s and the 8s on the bottom. Okay. This is higher than the rate of ACEs for adults in our state. This is higher than the rate of ACEs for adults in our state. Yes, ma'am?
There's more adverse childhood experiences happening now then? That's not a good sign.
Right. Gives us a great window of opportunity for trying to do some more prevention, I think. But, yeah.
It's true. I mean, these adults are going untreated apparently.
Yeah.
Or unaware. Anyway, it's really sad.
Right. No. Yes. It's a call to action. That's how we usually treat it, is a call to action. So you wonder in a classroom then why it's so difficult. Well, this is why. This is, you're trying to bring it all together for everyone, and it's a hard job. So what can we do? So this is the good news. Resilience building systems. They've been doing a lot more research around resilience. And are you familiar with resiliency? Okay. Everyone has that friend, or maybe is that person who had a whole boatload of ACEs or terrible things happen to them. Could have dropped out of school, could have made this choice, could have, maybe did, and then later on found a different path and took a different path from point A to point B, but made it. Resiliency, the person who didn't become addicted to drugs and was able to find their way anyway. Okay, so what is it? So we're starting to go, what is it about that person that suffered the same, or had the same traumatic stressors in their brain, had their brain changed the same way? What makes it possible for them to come out on the other end? And that's really the key. And it's new. They've been studying resiliency for a while, but they're starting to try to really nail down what components of resiliency really make the difference. And so right now, and so I kind of say that as we're in the state of flux, so it's kind of exciting for anyone who's starting to move into the field or is curious or trying to figure out what your spot will be. But good news is that there are some core areas that seem to impact resiliency. Community, culture, spirituality, attachment and belonging, and capability. Feeling that you are capable, you are meaningful, you have a place. Okay? And this says Resilience Index for Washington. These are the types of questions that they ask on the BRFIS. social emotional support questions, feeling that good things happen to me and that there's hope in my life. So even if I've had these things happen to me and I coped in these certain ways, feeling that there's still hope for me. There's still a chance that I can make it work, come out ahead in the long run. And one particular model that's been used by a number of communities around the state is called a community capacity building model. And whole workshops could be given on community capacity building. But basically, we've done some of this work here in our community, and that's what the hospital district seems to be doing as well, is looking at how do you build people's connections? How do you develop kind of a shared awareness around an issue and bring more people into the conversations and develop a collective effort to make a difference in something, whether it's substance abuse or maybe it's mentoring or maybe it's the whole thing, and you're going to figure out how your entire community can take on resiliency. And then this kind of model breaks it apart, but leadership expansion, coming together, learning and opportunity, adaptive stability and shared identity, and it kind of keeps going around. It's called a virtuous circle. So every time something works well in one part of the circle, it adds and makes positive things happen in the other part of the circle. So, and this is really small, and I'm sorry. This is from the Family Policy Council, which is the department at the state that was working most directly on adverse childhood experiences. That is now moved over, now it's the Department of Social and Health Services. But in communities that were receiving funding and specifically working on developing community capacity around adverse childhood experiences, they were seeing, so let's see, the green line is showing communities that had money and time to put some effort into juvenile offenders, juvenile arrests, making a concerted effort looking at the high school dropout rate. So communities that came together, built up some awareness, and then started focusing on it. Okay. So I include that just to show you that we can make some differences. I referenced the resiliency questions that are on the Burfus survey, and this kind of shows you when people report. So this is a different slide. It reports when people report that they're from a community that they feel connected to, that they feel attachment, that they feel is meeting their social emotional needs. There's a network of support for them, even if they have a great number of ACEs, they are less, this one's about unemployment, there's a whole bunch of different slides, but it manifests in a different way. You see, these people have 6 to 8 ACEs, but they feel supported, so there's much fewer of them unemployed. This group here, they don't feel supported. They have 6 to 8 ACEs, they're unemployed. So there's things that we can do within communities to help foster the resiliency for all of us. I want to make sure we're not thinking of it as like some other group of people. It's us. It's all of us. Population attributable risk. So this slide kind of just shows what they've done is broken it down. If you were to look at all the separation or divorce that is occurring in Washington State and using the data, 32.9% of it is attributable to adverse childhood experiences. Cancer, 25.5% cardiovascular disease. So as you go around looking at the predictability of adverse childhood experiences related to each of these things, hopelessness, then you can start to imagine as we add in more efforts in resiliency, more community building pieces, this big splotch becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and in fact the whole circle becoming smaller and smaller. Okay, and just to give you a couple examples of how people around the state are using the adverse childhood experiences information. And I'm sorry to read this like this, but the Parent Trust for Washington Children has incorporated ACEs questions into their work with addicted parents facing court action. And they're finding that kind of taking that frame and helping the parents understand and then kind of helping them realize what kind of intervention they need in the form of parenting classes, et cetera, is improving their outcomes by getting the people into parenting classes, and it's reducing the relapse among parents who have 4 or more ACEs. So social systems are starting to integrate this into what they do. Safe Harbor Crisis Nursery in the Tri-Cities is incorporating ACEs and trauma into its day-to-day strategies. As families come in, it's actually like a homeless intake. They run through the ACEs inventory and kind of figure out what a person's been dealing with instead of trying to treat like the depression as just depression. We're figuring out how we got here, the history. And you realize it, last time you spent half an hour talking to your doctor, this kind of stuff takes time. So if we're going to commit to this, we have to be willing to put in the time. Children of incarcerated parents, the legislator has mandated the executive branch to engage in an initiative to address the needs of children of incarcerated parents. The initiative and its processes are framed to address the likelihood that these children will have more ACEs. So they're preventively going, okay, we know that having a parent who's incarcerated is an ACE. Instead of waiting till these little guys grow up to start to figure out how we're going to intervene, let's intervene now. That makes great sense. With the help of the Mental Health Transformation Grant and the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, Spokane, and that's the group who did all of who's done the elementary studies so far. They're looking at how to put trauma-informed practices into the classroom. In fact, the state of Washington has developed a whole Compassionate Schools initiative for trying to help teachers and staff better within their classroom practices use trauma-informed practice with their students instead of like trying to say, oh, this student needs something special. We kind of assume that we are all have something going on, and so how do we function in a different way? And then lastly, that was the Compassionate Schools, the bottom there. What we can do, and this is what we've been starting to do, we're trying to tell everyone, host a dialogue. You don't need a facilitator or a speaker at the front. Just bring some people together, tell them what it's about, and talk about it. Adopt trauma-informed services and supports. Shift to dual generation strategies. That's what I was mentioning before. Break the cycle by addressing more than one age population at the same time. Invest in ACEs performed professional development. You're seeing a lot of that. School districts are becoming interested in it. Legislators are becoming interested in it. So it's great to see it gaining traction. Develop accommodations, increase social emotional support, and you can think about your own experiences. When have you felt most connected to your community? When have you not? And are there gaps that you can help fill in? I know in the Snoqualmie Valley, we've really tried to take a look at parent education from like preschool through high school. And as a parent, I can feel where the gaps are. Like I felt very supported when my kids were early childhood up through upper elementary, and middle school, not quite. And try to figure out where that support comes from. And I have the tools to go out and kind of make my own support group, but a lot of people don't have that. So what can we do to bring that in? Help share hope and invest in community capacity. So you've been victims of community capacity today. Your awareness in ACEs has hopefully increased as we've had this conversation. And the potential here is if we can effectively address ACEs, we'll bend the healthcare cost curve like crazy by putting the money in on the front end instead of on the back end. And not just healthcare, probably incarceration costs, mental health costs, public education costs. I mean, the list is huge. Drastically reduce disorders and disability. We can stop disastrous cycles of intergenerational poverty, treatment, education, prevention, treating the adults and thereby the children. Afford all children optimal development, school completion, arrival at adulthood with full potential for employment success and for a lifetime of well-being. Working on generating the kind of public will that supports sustained efforts for a full generation or more. Instead of, we have these little, we work on prevention in this area for this little bit of time in isolation. We're trying to break down silos of prevention and bring us all together so that we can combine our efforts and move forward en masse to make the greatest difference. Improving workforce productivity, lowering business costs, and improving our global competitiveness, boosting our economy, all of these things would be effects as we start to tear down the ACEs, if you will. But on the very last page of your slides, it's kind of small, but in case you were interested in learning more, I did include some pieces here. The top one, it's an ACEs webinar. It's a 3-hour webinar that was developed by the Family Policy Council for Washington State. A lot of it would be review of what you learned today. It goes into the brain piece a whole lot more in depth. And then it will take you through specific communities such as Walla Walla, who have specifically like a child resiliency system set up. And it's kind of fun to look at other communities throughout our state who have really taken this piece, taken the community capacity building model as well, and integrated that into some fantastic outcomes. The Center for Disease Control, you want to see the entire study, and that's where I'll go to find out the age population that Sue was asking about, is on the Center for Disease Control website. And even if you can't remember this, just Center CDC ACEs will get you there. If you liked the brain research and you want to learn more about how the trauma affects, because it affects the neurons, it affects the way the messaging can be sent back and forth within your brain. If you want to really get into the nitty-gritty with the brain development, go to googlescholar.com and just search for Dr. Teicher. And then lastly, as I was preparing for this, I came across a talk which was is Dr. Anda, and he was one of the original ACEs doctors on the study, doing a talk at Children's Hospital back in April of this year. And it's just an hour-long talk, and it's free, and it's this is the URL. So I would strongly encourage you to go even follow up with this talk today in a couple of days or a week to kind of solidify it all for you, especially if you're planning to have conversations with people about it. It just kind of helps you bring it all home. So, and he has a great style. So thank you all so much for coming out today.